Love is gone, that your love is gone.
Are you always this awkward? You looked over at Yoongi. He gave a smug smile. You sighed. As much as I would like to say no. I heard you didn't even know that you were a princess, he asked. Wouldn't it be difficult to keep that kind of secret? Your parents really went out of their way to hide that one. They did, didn't they? How could both of them keep that kind of secret? Why keep that kind of secret in the first place? The more you thought about it, however, the more it made sense. You always wondered why your dad had bodyguards. You were convinced it was simply because he had a thriving business. You just didn't realize that business involved running a country. In all honesty, you were too busy trying to stay above your schoolwork at all the private schools you were sent to growing up. You didn't pay attention to what your parents did all this time. You felt stupid for being so oblivious. You felt worse for being lied to. Hoseok was across the room from you both, giving Taehyung a rundown of all the things you needed to work on. You didn't want to hear it at the moment. You already felt overwhelmed as it was. I want to leave, you whispered to yourself. Yoongi's eyebrows went up. Do you? You looked at your shoes and nodded. Yoongi stood and grabbed your hand, intertwining his fingers in yours. Before you could ask anything, he pulled you out the back door and into the castle yard. What are you doing? You asked. He put a finger to his lips to signal you to be quiet. Gripping your hand tighter, he broke into a run. You ran with him until you got to the castle rose garden. Why did you bring me here? You asked, letting go of his hand and catching your breath. He put his hands on his head, catching his breath also. It sounded like you needed a break, and I'll take any chance I can get to escape Hoseok. He turned around and moved ahead, further into the garden. He stopped to touch the rose petals and admire each breed, as if he hadn't seen them in a while. I don't blame you, he said, walking behind him. He's irritating. He wasn't always like that. He used to be friendly and fun. That's hard to imagine, you muttered. Yoongi nodded. For you, yes. The rest of us, however, remember the old Hoseok well. It's hard for us to see him this way. What happened to him then? Yoongi stopped to look at you. The corner of his mouth pulled up, and he shook his head. Don't worry about it, princess. If you stick around long enough, you may see bits of the old him yourself. Yoongi gave you a tour of the garden. He had an incredible amount of knowledge about plants and flowers that might have bored you if you didn't find Yoongi himself so interesting. He didn't look like the sensitive type in any sense, nor did he talk like an emotional person, but just from his interests you could tell that there was a deep, artistic side to him. I forgot how great this garden was, he said. It really is the best of all the kingdoms. Do you travel a lot? He nodded. Hoseok and I travel to many different kingdoms to teach royalty, CEOs, spoiled rich girls, and anyone in between. Sounds like an amazing job. He shrugged. It pays the bills, I guess. You don't sound too thrilled. He turned to look at you. I'd prefer something a little more exciting, maybe. Princess Yoongi. You both looked over to see who was calling you. Through the tall rose bushes, you could see Taehyung and Hoseok running through the garden. Before you could say anything, Yoongi had an arm around your waist and a hand over your mouth. He pulled you back into the towering vineyards and brought you down to the ground to hide. What are you doing? You asked, muffled because of his hand. He brought you in, his lips brushing against your ear. SHHH, he whispered. It's more fun this way. You froze in your place, the sound of his whisper chilling your spine. You thought he would pull away, but he kept his hands and lips right where they were until Hoseok and Taehyung were out of sight. Once they left, you took Yoongi's hands and plucked them off your waist and mouth. He sat back, proud of himself. That was fun, he said. You burst into laughter. It was the first time you really laughed since you had came to the castle. You weren't sure why you were laughing so hard. Neither did Yoongi, but he laughed with you anyhow. I needed that, you said when your laughter finally receded. Thanks. He smiled at you, standing up. He held out a hand to help you up as well. It'll be all right, princess. You'll see. You looked back where Hoseok and Taehyung had last been. Are we just going to dodge them for the rest of the day? I might, Yoongi said. You can do whatever. You looked around and sighed. I'd really just love to be by myself for a while, honestly. You then realized how rude that sounded. Not because of you, or anything, you quickly said, trying to explain. You've been very kind. I just wish I had a moment to collect my thoughts. That's what I meant. Sorry. He laughed, completely unfazed. I knew what you meant. It's a lot to take in, right? He gave you a long glance, then nodded into the vineyards. Go take some time for yourself. I think after today's lesson, you've earned it. I'm going to see how long it takes Hoseok to find me. You smiled. He shot a finger gun at you. Catch you later, princess. With a long exhale, you walked further into the vineyards. They were absolutely breathtaking. Everything here was, really, it wasn't that the castle itself was terrible, but you were still miserable. You hadn't talked to your friends in days. You just found out your parents had been lying to you for a lifetime. The people you were spending time with were complete strangers, each one of them expecting something from you that you didn't know how to deliver. How were you going to be a princess? Was there still a chance this was a prank? After a bit of walking, you realized Taehyung was still looking for you. Would he get in trouble if you didn't return? He hadn't done anything wrong towards you. He had always been nice. You didn't want to get him in trouble. Before you could turn around to go back, however, you heard a faint giggle. It was the first time you had heard another girl around. Who was it? You walked over to the sound of the giggling, hearing a male voice in the mix. Overwhelmed with curiosity, you couldn't help but find the vine-enclosed area it was coming from and peek inside. There was a girl. Her back was turned towards you, but she was in the arms of someone, giggling. It was Namjoon. Don't tease me, Namjoon, the girl said, her back still towards you. I wouldn't lie to you, he replied. Never to you. He laughed. Wow, he actually smiled. And not only that, but it was a decent smile. It was shy and sweet and completely innocent. Not at all like the scowl he gave you on a daily basis. Wait, did he have dimples? I heard there's a princess in the palace now, the girl said. Do I need to worry about competition for your heart? Namjoon laughed ironically. Don't even mention her. She's completely clueless. She can't even hold an intelligent conversation, really. Is she pretty? The girl asked. He shook his head immediately. No, there's nothing worth looking at. Your heart seized in your chest. You knew he didn't like you, but to hear such cruel things out of his mouth was gut-wrenching. You looked down at your feet, trying not to let his words get to you. You didn't know him anyhow. What did his opinion matter? When you looked back up, he was staring right at you. You turned and ran. You had enough of Hoseok yelling at you all afternoon and couldn't bear the thought of Namjoon coming at you for a second round of it. You were a pretty decent runner, so you knew you could escape. You ran to the end of the vineyard, about to sprint into the rose gardens, but an arm caught yours and jerked you back. You growled. Let go, Namjoon. How much did you see? He asked, panting. That was the first thing out of his mouth. Really, you clenched your fist. You should worry about what I heard, not what I saw, you said. You tried to get loose and walk away. He grabbed you tighter and pulled you back. Don't tell anyone about this, he said, more of a command than a plea. And what would I tell them? You asked, ripping your arm away from him. That you have a secret girlfriend, or that you think I'm trash. He looked surprised. I didn't mean. Forget it. I don't want to talk about you with anyone anyhow. I can't stand you either. So let's just leave each other alone while I'm stuck here and call it even. You stepped past him, hoping you could hold back the tears stinging your eyes until you got far enough away from him. You hated it here. At first you thought Taehyung was bowing, but then you realized he was just holding his knees to get air. How? Could you? Just run away. Like that? He asked, huffing. Apparently he had been running around the yard for a while with Hoseok. Hoseok had long given up on Yoongi, but Taehyung didn't have the same option, seeing as your father had hired him as your assistant. You sat on a bench in the rose gardens, waiting to be scolded. Do you know how much trouble I'll be in if anything happens to you? He asked. They'll gut me alive publicly and put my mother in the front row. Do you really want my mother to watch her son be executed? Do you? I'm sorry. I'm sorry. How many times do I have to say it, you said? What happened? You frowned. Nothing. He sat next to you. You're a bad liar, but I can't be mad at you for it. He patted his chest, trying to catch his breath. He looked over to you and smiled as best he could through his hyperventilating. Taehyung, you whispered, I don't think I can do this. Why? It's too much. I can't do any of this. I shouldn't be a princess. Ah, he said. Is it that hard to accept who you are? Of course it is, you said, standing up. A week ago I was a college graduate. This week I'm a princess. That's not normal. That's not even logical. And really, it's not fair. I agree, he said, standing up to face you. But it is what it is. You can't keep running from it. Just do your best until your father gets here. You can settle everything with him then. But let's not disappoint him when the time comes, okay? His big puppy dog eyes looked down at you. He took your hand into his and held it to his chest. Your heart skipped a beat. He never had touched you like that before. You'll make a great princess, he said, his hand warm in yours. Just keep learning and doing your best. Your best is good enough, I promise. You smirked and nodded. You still didn't think you could do it, but it was nice to have Taehyung encourage you. Let's go see His Majesty, he said. He'll be sure to have some encouraging words for you. Come on. He let go of your hand, patted you on the shoulder, and walked ahead. You smiled and slipped your hands in your back pocket, ready to follow. However, caught on a piece of paper. You pulled it out. How long had that been there? In. Did you hear what I said? You looked up at Jin. He leaned into you, waiting for your answer. No, I'm sorry, you said. What was that? He chuckled. I said that if you ever start to feel overwhelmed, let me know. I'm here to help, okay? You pressed your lips together and nodded. You weren't sure if you should tell him about the notes you had gotten. You were sure the first one was from Jungkook. After all, he had pranked your room on the same day. Did he also slip another note into your pocket while you were dancing? Was he that persistent with his pranks? You didn't want to look like a coward in front of Jin, though you tried to put the thought away. You could handle Jungkook on your own. Let's get to our lesson for today, shall we? He asked. Come with me. He took you to a parlor room. There were leather chairs, a few shelves of books, a small bar, and a chess table. He sat at the chess table and offered you a seat. Are you a chess player? You nodded. I play against my dad a lot. Aha! Then you must be very good. Your dad is an excellent player. You've played my father at chess. He nodded. When I was younger, my father invited him often. You haven't mentioned your parents before. Where are they at? He pressed his lips together and straightened the pieces on the board. Our mother passed away when I was 10. Our father passed away a few years ago. Oh, you said, your heart aching for him. I'm sorry. It's all right, he said. I spent most of my life watching my father run the country on his own. It prepared me for doing the same thing. He motioned for you to make a move. Ladies first. You moved your pawn. Were our parents close then? He nodded and moved one of his pieces. You sighed. I wish I had known all of this. I always thought Dad was out on business trips. I didn't realize he was, running a country. Why did he go so far out of his way to keep everything a secret? I don't feel prepared for anything. You moved your knight. Jin took it out with his rook. No one feels ready at the beginning. Sometimes the best learning experience is the one you're not prepared for. He began to speak historical battles for a while, emphasizing individuals who weren't prepared for their stations. You weren't well versed in history, but you knew enough to keep up with the conversation. I recommend Lao Tzu's Art of War, he said. Excellent reading. There's a line in there that stands out to me the most. One may know how to conquer without being able to do it. You and I both know the strategies you can use on this chessboard. But if we can't play the game, then our strategies are useless. You nodded. I think I'm the least prepared out of everyone here when it comes to strategy. You could already sense that by the way Jin was taking all your pieces. That's what we're here for, he said, smiling gently while taking your rook. We'll teach you everything we know, my dear. A few more turns passed, and you couldn't hold back your curiosity. Jin, you asked, why don't you have a wife? It would make your tasks so much easier, wouldn't it? He laughed. Yes, some days I would think it would make it easier, but the only option for me, really, is an arranged marriage. I never liked the idea of those. I always figured if there was a queen I wanted. He moved his bishop diagonally, right until it was one space away from your queen. He picked up your queen and wrapped his hand around it, looking you straight in the eye. I would just take her for my own. Your stomach clenched. And that's checkmate, he said, his face relaxing into a smile. Good game, though. I enjoyed your company. He stood. You did the same. Be sure to come and play with me anytime, he said. Until next time, milady. He curled his lip up to the side and left. The long day ended, but your thoughts didn't. So many things rattled around in your brain, robbing you of any sleep. You couldn't stand to be in your room anymore. Even though night had already fallen, you got up and went out to the front of the castle yard. There were enough guards around so that you didn't feel like you were in any sort of danger. Your martial arts skills gave you some confidence as well. The night air was warm and a little humid, but it was peaceful. Crickets sang to the full moon, accompanying the rushing sound of the fountains. You walked down the main pathway, looking into the line of trees on either side. Something seemed inviting about them. Just for a moment, you wanted to walk through them. You veered from the path and went into the trees, the crisp ground crunching beneath you. It wasn't as pretty as the gardens, but it was quiet. You stopped to breathe in summer air. But even though your footsteps stopped, other continued. You turned towards the noise. You couldn't see anything except for the faint light of the walkway off in the distance. Had you really gone that far? You heard the crunching sound again. Hello, you called out. No answer, just silence. You took a few steps forward, then stopped. You heard 2 footsteps after yours. Who is it? You asked. Still no answer. This isn't funny anymore. Come and show yourself. A deep voice echoed behind you. I agree, it's not funny. You turned around you, trying to find where the voice was coming from. You couldn't see anything. Not funny that a nobody becomes a princess in a day. The voice continued. Who are you? You tried not to sound as scared as you really were. Just a messenger. A messenger? From who? What message? There was a pause. The next word came out in just a whisper. Run. You didn't have to be told twice. Heart pounding through your chest and up into your throat. You raced through the trees to reach the light at the end of them. You heard feet crunching not far behind yours. You looked back once, but scraped your arm against a tree as soon as you did. It was too dark to see him. For some reason, you couldn't scream. Fear had taken over. Did he have a gun? A knife? If you had to face him, the wide open space was the best place to do it. But first, running. You ran out of the trees, breaking free into the light. You didn't bother looking back. You ran straight for the entrance of the castle, past the guards. If they saw someone, they could stop them, right? You ran up the stairs still full speed straight to your room. You shut the door behind you, locking it. You shrank against the door, panting, hands shaking. Who was that? What did they want? Was the person threatening you really someone at the castle? Taehyung. You got up and went to the intercom, looking for Taehyung's button. You pressed it. It beeped. Yes, Your Majesty. His voice never sounded so wonderful. TTT. In, he asked, his tone now grave. What's wrong? You couldn't steady your voice. I need come. I'll be right there. Your heart sank as soon as the intercom beep sounded and you were left alone in the room. Even though you were only talking to him over an intercom, it felt like someone was there with you for a moment. After the longest 15 seconds of your life, a knock came to the door. Princess, Taehyung's voice said. Are you in there? Are you hurt? You unlocked the door and swung it open. At the sight of his warm face, you threw your arms around him and buried your head in his chest. Princess? He asked. After a moment, you felt his arms wrap around you. The way he held you was so comforting. What happened? You couldn't say anything at the moment, but just gripped onto him. He took a deep breath, but didn't ask you anything more. It's okay. I'm here, he said, rubbing your back. You're safe with me. I promise. You relaxed a little. You still weren't sure what to tell him. What happened? Was it real? Did you dream it? He pulled away, taking your face between his hands and looking into your face. Tell me what happened. You sat in a chair on the side of the room. He brought you a glass of water from your bathroom and kneeled next to your chair on one knee. You drank about half the glass before you could get any words out. He took your other hand and held it, stroking it with his thumb. It soothed you. You were able to tell him what happened. You tried to remember every detail, even though it was a little fuzzy thanks to the adrenaline. Taehyung's face turned from concern to an expression of intense focus and anger. Did you see his face at all? He asked. You shook your head. I just ran. Good girl. Who knows what would have happened to you? His hand on yours gripped tighter. By the look on your face, you said, Jungkook isn't this cruel with his pranks. No, he does adolescent pranks, not terrifying ones. Your heart sank. You were hoping that it was all just a really horrible joke by your host, but it was real. Then I take it these aren't from him either. You stood and went to your side drawer, taking out the 2 threats you had gotten. You handed them to Taehyung. He looked over them, eyes narrowing in on the writing. He held the letters up. Does anyone know about these? You shook your head. Don't tell anyone, he said. Let me look into it first. Why? His eyes darted around the floor in thought. Just trust me on this one. He looked up, his round eyes meeting with yours. You trust me, don't you? You couldn't think of a reason not to. You nodded. Then just wait, he said. Whoever it is has to be in the castle. And if that's true, then it won't be long until we find them. You own a lake? You looked at the sparkling water in front of you. The castle grounds were large, but you didn't realize just how large until you saw the private lake. We own a few odd things around here, Taehyung said, shrugging. Sure, a castle, a vineyard, a lake. Area 51 and Disneyland were probably around here somewhere too. Why are we here again? Jimin asked to meet here. You raised an eyebrow. Don't worry, Taehyung said. I'll stay to make sure he behaves. That's not likely, a voice interjected. You both turned to see Jimin, wearing swim shorts and a white t-shirt, sporting ruffled hair. He barely looked like a prince, except for the handsome part. He looked you over. You'll be really uncomfortable if you get those jeans wet. Why are we meeting here? You asked him. Because it's beautiful. He smiled and stepped towards you. And I love things that are beautiful. You blushed. Taehyung snickered. Jimin's love of beauty has no bounds. And why should it? Jimin replied. Beauty in life should be pursued. Whether it's scenery, poetry, or he stopped to look at you. A lovely woman. Ugh. He was so good at that. You didn't want to fall for it. But it was hard. Shall we then? Jimin asked, holding out his hand. Shall we what? Take the boat out. You looked at the lake. There was a speedboat docked on the water. You shuddered. Come on. Let's go. It'll be fun. You coming, Taehyung scowled. You know I get seasick. Jimin gave a mischievous smirk. Do you? That slipped my mind. I bet it did. Before you could say anything, Jimin grabbed your hand and dragged you to the boat. He hopped down from the dock onto the boat, then turned and held out his hand for you to join him. You swallowed, gripped onto the post next to you, and slowly reached out. He pulled you in, and you almost fell in face first. The boat rocked when you fell in. You screamed and gripped onto Jimin. He laughed. I haven't even started the boat yet. Come on. He went to the front and turned it on. Don't we have life vests, you asked? He smiled and shook his head. We don't need those. Not unless you can't swim or something. You opened your mouth to say something, but before you could, Jimin hit the gas. You gripped the seat. He sped until he reached the middle of the lake and stopped. You were still gripping the chair as he stood to go to the back. Okay, that wasn't so bad. Let's get started with our lesson, he said. You turned around to see a picnic basket, wine glasses, and a bottle of champagne. He popped the cork and poured you a glass. You stood up, keeping low to the boat, and walked over to the bench next to him. Is the lesson on how to get drunk on a boat? Nope. I'm saving that for the final. He caught your scowl. I'm kidding, he said, handing you the glass. My job is to teach you about social customs. As a princess, you'll have a lot of scenarios where you'll be drinking with someone you don't really know. So, he poured himself a glass and raised it to yours. The glass clinked. Let's see how you do. You and Jimin had spent the better part of the afternoon talking. He was witty and charming on a professional level. His flirting was shameless and boundless. He was definitely a prince. The Playboy prince? I never really understood the phrase, girl in every port until I met you, Jimin. He chuckled. I'll take that as a compliment. It wasn't, really. Nevertheless, I'll take it how I want. It was probably just the buzz of the alcohol, but you wanted to torment him a little. Your plans are to be a playboy until the day you die. He looked down at his drink, more bitter than sweet. Believe it or not, I actually want to get married. Yeah? How many times? Once, he said, a hint of annoyance in his voice. But I don't want just any marriage. I want what my parents have. He stared off into the horizon. When I was a kid, I thought their flirting and playful banter was gross and revolting. But as I got older, I realized that it's a rare and beautiful relationship. You stared at him, not sure what to say. I don't want anything less than that, he said. I don't want to leave any stone unturned until I find a woman I can love for a lifetime. His eyes shifted over to meet yours. You didn't look away. You sat there, mesmerized, watching his eyes as they reflected with light that was bouncing off the water. A smile crept across his lips, and it made you too nervous to hold the eye contact any longer. You felt your face get hot. You hoped he couldn't see it. Anyways, we should go back to shore, he said, standing. Any longer out here and you'll burn your fragile skin. He was quick to jump up and head to the front of the boat. You started to put the leftover dishes back in the basket, not paying attention when he turned the key over. You stood as soon as he hit the gas pedal and went straight over the side.